Hey friends, it's me, Dustin. I'm the producer of this podcast, and I just wanted to jump on here and apologize for the technical difficulties that we had in this episode. We had audio and video issues. You'll see those probably throughout a couple of times. About halfway through, about 9 minutes in, the audio gets significantly better. We promise that we'll do better next time, but we thought this was a valuable podcast to put out and not just scratch. So hope you enjoy it, and we'll do better next time.
Well, I want to start today. Or hi, Danny.
Hi.
I'm pretty ready to get started.
I
Okay.
get that impression.
So I'm gonna read a little quick Twitter thread that I posted.
Sure.
It's pretty short, and then a pastor responded, and I'm interested in us dealing with his response.
Yeah. Any way that after the show you could explain to me how Twitter threads work?
Yeah.
I don't fully understand.
You just hit right, and then you hit add another tweet and keep going. I'll show you.
Thank you. All right, tell me the tweet.
Okay. So I was told by a pastor that not Danny, that my doubts / deconstruction is, quote, a slap in the face to Jesus who died for me. And
Hold on, sorry, real
rough.
quick. Is this this is to you?
No, this is my tweet, and then I'm going to read the response.
Perfect. Okay, sorry.
Okay, I'm starting over. I was told by a pastor that my doubts and deconstruction is a slap in the face to Jesus who died for me. And those words haunt me and hurt me so deeply. If this is a true statement, then Gideon, Abraham, many of the Psalms, Thomas, and so many more are slaps in the face of Jesus. But the God I see in Scripture is one patient with us and staying with us amidst all our questions. I just really don't think God is that easily offended by our questions. Jesus himself cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And he sits at the right hand of the Father. This is where it gets sassy. In conclusion, please don't say shit like that to people, and don't pretend that you know God's reaction to people's journeys. Period. Pretty good wrap up.
Took a pretty hard turn there in the last couple of characters.
I said what I said. And then this pastor who I have briefly met responded. It was good. It was just there's one line that I want to kind of unpack.
Sure.
He said, I'm sorry that was said, Emily. The Psalms are ripe with expressed doubt. Thomas gets a bad rap for doubting when Jesus doesn't condemn him for it. It is possible to wrongly glory in doubt, but arrogantly not acknowledging them in yourself and dismissing others is probably worse. So that was a lovely response to I was just in kind of a bad mood. But I meant what I said. I was just sassy. The thing I wanted to talk about is the idea of glorying in deconstruction or in doubting.
Yeah, you mean finding joy in it or whatever. Is that what that means? I've never heard.
I think it means being proud of it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what's your initial take? Are you pro you should be proud of it, or
I just don't. I guess to me it felt like a misunderstanding. That's the real word. Of.
I wasn't going to correct you.
Well, I'm my own English teacher. Misunderstanding of the process, right?
Yeah.
I think sometimes. Here's what I'm realizing is that I come here straight from school to record this, and I'm still in you can't mess with me mode that I put on as a teacher.
Yeah.
So that's why I come off a little intense.
I bet you that those listening or watching can tell when school started just by the tone of the episodes that we were.
Do you really think that?
I think so.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Because
yeah.
I'm no, I'm not done talking. That's what I say to my students. I'm so sorry. I don't think talking about it is the same as enjoying it or being proud of it. Being vocal is different than glorying in it. And I felt like that guy equated them as the same. It felt low-key passive-aggressive because I'm very open about my deconstruction.
Yeah. I think there is an interesting connection between, especially people that are anti-deconstruction, talking about it as being proud or brash or prideful or glorying in it. I just listened to our episode with Tim from the New Evangelicals. It just came out as we're recording this, just came out a few days ago. And that was one of the things I thought was really interesting. And in that episode was he's kind of wrestling with that a little bit too. It's people, if you remember in our conversation, he left his church because they were you can have these thoughts, but you can't really talk out loud. And I think that's where the heart of that frustration comes from. Is like, if you're talking about it too much, you're finding joy in it, you're finding goodness out of it. Like, we've talked a lot about it being a process of discipleship. Like, I think all of those things tied together is what makes people say, like, just don't be too positive as you talk about it, because there is a, like, I would even say in the evangelical church, like growing up, there was a lot of, let's talk about doubts, but again, it was like talking about it to be like, God is the same at the doubt was my issue, if that makes sense, right? And so, like, God met me in it and changed my mind out of doubt. And this conversation of deconstruction is like, maybe what I've been told is a lie, and that's pretty destructive to that tribe's thought.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you. I think often the church says, like, you can doubt, but on a leash. You can doubt as much as we're comfortable with. And if you pull away from the leash, like, then screw you.
Yeah, I don't even think the church cares if you doubt. Like,
yeah,
I've been thinking a lot about that, like, in terms of, like, I had lots of questions, and I was never really shamed for doubting. I was shamed for coming to a different conclusion on the other end of my doubt.
That's a TikTok right there. That was phenomenal. That was so good.
Okay.
I just need to say that.
What was also good was your self-editing of the F-bomb you were ready to drop.
Why'd you have to call me out?
You should just have it. But I think that's true, though, right? Like, I think that it's, the fear is not about, and maybe it's about the process, but the biggest fear is, I doubt that God was against homosexuality. And if I end the doubt being like, well, God actually was. So, but if I am the other side, like, well, it sounds like he probably wasn't, then I've created disunity and division and all that within the body that I was a part of.
Well, it's what we said in a few episodes ago of, like, being allowed to wrestle with your emotions, but you have to stay with what they would consider orthodoxy.
Yeah. Yeah, orthodoxy is a really interesting thing to me.
Yeah.
Like, I think about this all the time, and I think I just have it doesn't give me any excitement to, like, or excitement's maybe the wrong word, but the idea of orthodoxy, because I think it's pretty manufactured, has never been something that has been that crazy important. Even as, like, we had a week from today, or a week ago from today, we did a class on the Bible at the Well, and that was one of the things, I maybe said it briefly going over it, but, like, the idea of what we have considered to be orthodox is still relatively modern in the sense of, like, what we know as Christians, but we've been like, well, this has been what it's been forever. And I think that's such an interesting topic. And something that I don't think, like, first century Christians were, like, talking about what was orthodox and not orthodox.
Dang. I mean, I think you're right, but also, like, I was told as I started this process, actually, I was especially told when I started going to the Well, classic, like, from pastors, you are not submitting yourself to orthodoxy in church history.
Yeah. Well, that opens up another, who or what are we submitting to? And that's one of the things I think is interesting about the evangelical church is you're submitting to the Bible and orthodoxy. And I would say you're not submitting as much to Jesus. Very unfair statement to evangelicals as a whole. So I'm pigeonholing a section of them because I would classify myself in that. Some of my greatest progressive friends would classify themselves as that. But I'm saying, like, pretty conservative evangelicalism, the thing you're submitting to is the Bible and John Calvin and a lot less of Jesus.
The real JC.
The real JC.
That was pretty good.
That was good.
No, yeah, I think that's it, right? Is because the question isn't really, are you submitting yourself to orthodoxy? It's, are you submitting yourself to how we interpret the Bible and interpret orthodoxy?
Yeah.
And what we've chosen to keep and what we've not chosen. You can say all day, we do it just like the early church. But I remember the moment that I came to the Well, which is a more progressive space, it felt so much like the early church because we were meeting in a space, like in a common space.
Yeah.
And we were just wrestling with, like, the claims of Jesus. And no one was speaking with, like, that much, like, this is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And I felt so free and able to actually engage with Jesus that way. But I want to bring it a little bit back around, if you don't mind. Do you think it is possible to wrongfully glory in deconstruction?
Yeah, I think you can. Well, I think you can boast in anything. I think that you can make it a prideful thing. So I just ran into this guy today at Course Coffee. It's in Frenchtown, and actually I think he listens to the podcast. So if you listen, you know I'm talking about you. But he's a guy that I've met at different coffee shops around, like kind of former church planter. He said today he's more esoteric in his beliefs, and so he's not like, I don't know that he's super into Jesus, but he's spiritual-ish. Follows us on TikTok, all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that he was saying is like the people that were like leading the deconstruction voices on TikTok and what he's seeing are people that are kind of glorying in that in a negative way, in the sense that like they were assholes as evangelicals and now they're assholes as deconstructionists. And so I do think like they just switched who the bad guy was. And I do think you can have a wrong lens in how you go about it. And please write into the show if I just misquoted you wrong on this, but I like that's what I was like, man, that's like really interesting. And I used Tim as a great example of an evangelical who's not doing that. Like I think Tim's like really comes at it from a really, really sweet hearted place, and he's challenging and he pushes, but he was really wholeheartedly bought into the church as an evangelical. And now he's like, I want to do something new with this. I don't want to throw it all away. But I see people that are like, well, I'm atheist, agnostic, I'm whatever. I've left all this, and they're deconstructing, but really they just, what they thought was the good guy became the bad guy, and they switched teams, and now they're fully attacking the other thing. And so that's where I think like deconstruction can go way too far, is you're just like swapping teams and swapping bad guys.
I mean, I think that's fascinating, and I think that's exactly what the work of healing often is. I have on this podcast said that I would rather vilify people than act like that is a real temptation that happens in deconstruction and in any processing of your story, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So like, I'm not saying they're the, like those people who have switched sides. I think you're right. I think that's a fair analysis, but it's kind of natural, right? I think it goes back to why we need a deconstructing community. I think we need people to like call us out in our BS and be like, okay, hey, but you're doing to them what you feel like they did to you. However, I also heard this very interesting conversation where these people were talking about deconstruction, and they were saying, you asked us to be all in to this. Why would you think that that part of our personality that we grew into of being all in would change? You want us to be 1 foot in and 1 foot out now that we're deconstructing, but you did not want us to be 1 foot in, 1 foot out when we were in the church and believing. I think that's interesting.
Yeah. I think the whole, and we've said this before, and so, but I don't think it's beating a dead horse. Like, I think this is a pendulum swing, and there's more movement happening than Exodus, and there's shifting happening, and I see important things happening. But I think it's hard when you witness the thing that you care really deeply about. And so you, as a pastor in an evangelical space, you see your people leaving, and you see them what looks like gloating, maybe because they're in a different space, they're glorying and they're taking pride or whatever. That, and you said this, you want to talk about this, and we haven't talked about this, but you talked about the stages of grief and deconstruction. Maybe we'll talk about that in a later episode. But I think they're having stages of grief of watching the thing that they care about be pulled apart. And so
the pastor.
And I think like this is the easy part of this conversation, is we often sit on the side of those on the other, like we're on one side of the fence. And what's interesting and important to do is realize, like, even if we disagree, they're processing real-time emotions and having real-time grief and real-time pain about the thing they love that's being deconstructed. And so that's just interesting.
Well, yeah, I wonder how you feel this way as a pastor, because I one time was talking to some friends of mine who he's a pastor and like he has a wife, so I was talking about them. But I don't know. But I remember she said, she was like, it is impossible not to take someone leaving our church personally, because that is our life's work. She was like, so no, I can't stay friends with you. Or
oh, wow.
I mean, I feel like that was kind of intense, but like, I never heard that explanation.
Yeah, I wouldn't take it as far as I can't be friends with you. Like, I've had friends that have left churches I've been a part of that I'm still friends with. Mm-hmm. But it is hard to not take it personally. Like my wife and I talk about this a lot, in the sense that like it's God doing work through the church and through us, but we're humans, and there's pride and there's arrogance. And so when you see someone stop coming, or someone says something hurtful or something like about the church or about you, like it's hard not to internalize that. as a you thing. And so you look at a evangelical pastor and watching not just people that are faceless people leaving, but people like you that were like the highest version, the golden child, right, of that that tribe, right? And so it's like you leaving is a hard hit. And so it's like, and I do, as someone that's not generally or naturally empathetic, it's important for me to like think about like, man, there's a lot of emotions that are happening on the other side of this for other people.
To be honest, I've never thought about those emotions, and it's really helpful for you to point them out, because sometimes I can get very annoyed and just feel judged from people on that side.
Yeah.
Who are like, because when you hear that people are talking about you and saying like, sending prayers for her, so worried about her, right. I'm like,
yeah.
Like it's hard for me to think, well, they're probably having some mixed emotions too. And also, like you said, you have plenty of pastor friends who want to deconstruct and don't feel comfortable. That could be playing into this of like, they did something that I don't feel like I can, or not.
Yeah, I do think there's some level of like, and this is for not just pastors, but for your friends probably, and for my friends that are pastors, and like, there might be a level of envy in the sense that it's like, I don't feel allowed to do this. And I'll say, putting myself I feel a lot more freedom being the lead pastor of the Well than I did as the associate pastor of the last two churches I was at. Like, I feel like, and there's some level of like, I just know that if I say something that's out of bounds, the only person that can be pulled under is me. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to come to me about it and not my supervisor. And so I feel more accountability, but also ownership of my words and my thoughts and my actions. And I think there's people that are in spaces, as whether they're clergy or they're lay people, that are like, there's maybe jealousy is the wrong word because it comes across wrong.
Yeah.
But there's like, man, I just want the freedom to do that, and they don't feel that freedom.
Maybe curiosity.
Yeah, maybe.
Something like that. Like, I mean, at first I very much was not vocal about it, and starting this podcast and starting to be more vocal about my deconstruction and my doubts. Yeah. Like, I've had a lot of messages from people saying like, I can't believe you have the guts to post this or say this. I would never do that.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, not everyone has to do that. You totally open yourself up for backlash.
Well, for as many positive things as you got, which probably give you a lot of life, you've had seasons of getting pretty hard hate for this too. So it's like, so it's not like it's all roses and unicorns.
I mean, like the tweet I read, that line that your deconstruction is a slap in the face to Jesus who died for you was in a 15-minute voicemail where like he was just quoting Bible verse after Bible verse about how I was doing the wrong thing. Like, that is freaking brutal.
Yeah. Yeah.
But sure, I guess I opened myself up to that because I was open or public about it.
Yeah. That's so interesting. But I think that's bad. Like, I've tried to be pretty empathetic thus far. I would say that's bad theology, though. To be like, that's a slap in the face to Jesus.
I think that's a
we
horrible
haven't even
thing
dove
to
into
say.
that.
I think that is such a horrible thing to say.
Yeah. Oh, that's wild to me.
But that's kind of speaking about, like, we've kind of hit a bunch of topics, and I've been loving this convo.
Yeah.
But to go into maybe the theme of today's episode and talking about this voicemail I got that had a lot, like, it was just Bible passage after Bible passage after Bible passage.
I didn't even think you could leave a 15-minute voicemail.
Oh, you can. I experienced it. I actually had to delete it because I kept listening to it, and that wasn't healthy.
Yeah. How long ago did you delete it?
A month ago.
I bet you it's still on there. You can undelete it if you want. I think
really?
I think you're
deleted. Is it recently deleted?
I think that they stick around for a little bit.
I haven't looked
listen
for it.
to it now? No,
that's fine. Woof. But I actually want to bring up the Bible again. And actually, I was processing this in the car, and I was like, I know we already had an episode about the Bible, but I actually think that doing another episode about a similar topic and having new and different ideas is part of deconstruction, right? Sure. It's that you continue to progress and evolve what you think about something. So something that I said in May is different than like how I feel now in October. Yeah. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
So chill out if you're mad. I don't know. That's my like. So we had essays that I in my class.
Yeah.
I teach English class. And one kid's intro was, by the way, this is all I'm going to say. And if you don't like it, don't tell me because I really don't care. Okay, let's get into it.
Like
it was an amazing intro.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we were talking about the Bible the other week at some event.
Yeah.
It sounds like it was a secret event.
Yeah.
It was.
It was.
But
it wasn't. It happens quarterly. You
yeah,
can email me if you
I'm
want to sign up.
And we were talking about the Bible, and someone said something really interesting, and they said, it's hard for me to enter back into a relationship with the Bible because it was something used to harm me for so long, which is something I said in our last episode about the Bible. And the analogy that came to my mind is if like someone had only ever used a fork as a weapon, like only ever used to stab you. I do know someone who was stabbed with a fork. Do you?
No, I did use a fork the other night to pop a pussy lump on my daughter's finger.
Rough.
And she may be traumatized with forks now. Who knows?
She gets it.
She gets it.
No, so it's like, so let's say it's been something that you've only ever experienced as a weapon.
Yeah.
And then someone comes to you and says, no, this is supposed to feed you. Well, that would be scary. I don't want it near my mouth. Like, I don't want to consume it, something that's harmed me for so long. It's hard. It is so, so hard to recontextualize something that was weaponized against you.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of the struggle of the Bible.
Yeah. Well, and the person that was in that conversation with us, like the Bible has been used as a huge weapon against her and her community and her fiance. Like it's just so much about
as the LGBTQ community.
Yes. Yeah. And like that's a thing that we can just thump all day long, especially people in my seat, where it's like the Bible is rarely weaponized against me, right? And it's like, but I know it's bad, or I know it's been used this way, but it's good. And I even caught myself that night. Like it was actually really insightful for me because I continually tried to point back to, and I saw other people in the room do the same thing. Like, I know it's been harmful, but it's good. I know it's been harmful, but it's good. And the reality is like, until you experience not just that thing being good, but people around you showing you the goodness of it, living into the goodness of it, like there needs to be a lot of work done to reclaim that as a tool of good and not harm.
Been weaponized or just been, maybe that's too intense of a word. I don't think it's always too intense of a word.
Well, it's the reason like the well meets in a brewery because there's church, like a church building is triggering to people. Yeah. And I think like I go back and forth on like that whole, like how much do we accommodate that? Yeah. And that sounds very harsh and not caring, but how much do we like accommodate that? And how much do we just say like, this is what it is? But the reality is it's like, not everything can be everything to everyone, but you can actively try to create the safest space possible. And like those things I don't think have to be mutually exclusive.
So, but think about how interesting that is though. It's like, we don't meet in a church building, but we are still diving into scripture. And so it's like, this is a weird analogy, but it's low-key kind of like exposure therapy.
Sure.
Like, I don't think it's not that manipulative, but what I'm saying is like, it's easing back into it.
There's been tons of people that are not church people that have come off the Katy Trail biking, have come in and been like, oh, like they're having church. They stopped in and they're like, I'm going to stick around for a little bit. And they stick around and they come up to me afterwards and like, that was really, really wonderful. And they're like, but I'm not a church person. But you have to create a space. And I said this very early on, like you have to create a space where people can accidentally go to church. And I don't mean that in a manipulative way, but where they can experience the goodness of God in a place they didn't imagine that ever happened.
And can I say, I would call that orthodoxy, because you know what? That is what Jesus and his disciples were doing. And after Jesus was dead, that's what they were doing. I'm sure there were people that were like, what are you guys talking about?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's adorable.
It's adorable.
So, but I actually had an interesting conversation about the Bible with someone that I want to hear your take on, because I actually think that we might disagree on this.
Yeah.
I love that we work so hard at this.
We work hard.
But
not hard enough.
I was like, basically I was telling him, I was like, it's hard because in a lot of ways I'm really longing to be comforted by God and his word and all these things, but there's also a lot of anger and frustration right now, and it's hard to hold those both, to really long for comfort and feel a distance because of wrestling. And I was like, so what is left to comfort me? Like, that's what I asked. It was a very intense conversation.
Sure.
But and he said art. And I was like, huh. He goes, you learning to engage the Bible the way you did is probably why you're an English teacher. And I was like, you're probably right. Like,
Yeah.
you learn. He goes, what did you love about the Bible when you loved it? I was like, that it created conversation and he was like, yeah, that's what you do all day in your classroom, which was so adorable. But like, also, he was like, the Bible was the example to you of taking great literature or any sort of art and finding comfort and finding your own story in it. And so even if the Bible isn't safe anymore, you can still find comfort in your story in art. Interesting. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Complete failure about trying to fight. I think I agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I thought you would be like, that's kind of dumb.
Sweet.
I thought you would kind of be like, that's kind of dumb. Like you still need to, engage the Bible.
Yeah.
That's not how I think of you. I'm sorry.
I
think that's definitely
think-
what Dustin's thinking.
I think that's right. I do think you should engage scripture.
Yeah.
I think that is all true. But I mean, like, if God is in every part of creation and we're created in God's image and the rocks cry out and art is something we create, right? We're created in the image of God. So we're creating as God created. Like, I think there's no limit to how we can engage the creator of the universe. And the Bible is, I think, a really helpful tool. But like, there are people that will never read the Bible, but equally know the goodness of God. They maybe don't know like the story of Jesus the way I know it, but I think they know the goodness of God.
You are on fire today. I'm serious. Oh my gosh. Zinger after zinger. Like, yes. And I think, and maybe that's it, right? Is maybe entering back into the Bible means starting to engage it first as art. Because again, that's the other hard thing. Imagine if someone showed you a painting and said, this is the word of God and it is inherent. You would be like, what?
Yeah. Well, you said that before. And also, like, I do think that's part of the issue is depending on your tribe, you're told to engage the Bible as a textbook, not as a narrative story or a piece of art.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's right. So
yeah. So I don't know. I mean,
I'm really not trying to make any weird jokes. So.
No one gets it but us. We're going to keep it that way.
Sure.
Well, I don't really know how long this has been. We've kind of been all over the place.
Sure.
But I think we had some good points. Not to toot our own horn.
Not to toot our own. Well, I think part of the conversation around this, and we have hit a lot of different things, like kind of looking back and thinking back, but like the core
20 minutes ago.
Yeah, the core of what we're talking about is, I think, the agility and the expansiveness of God. Like, almost everything that you've talked about has been someone trying to put God in a smaller box than God was designed to be put in. And I think you're like, hey, man, like, God is bigger than all of those things. And I think for those, wherever they're at in deconstruction, there's probably been a point where someone said, God fits in this box. And that's created some frustration or pain. And I think the truth is God's bigger than that box, and that God is going to engage you. If your pain is the Bible, God's going to find other ways to engage you. If your pain is the church, God's going to find other ways to engage you. I think that's a truth that we're not often told, especially by the really conservative churches. Like, God can only engage you through these mechanisms and vehicles. And the truth is, if God wants to engage you, God's going to engage you. And the truth is that God wants to be in a relationship with all of us. So God's going to find a way to do that.
Incredible synthesis of putting that all together. Like, I had a friend tell me one time, Emily, if you're flipping over rocks, looking for truth, you're never going to find something bigger than God. So you don't have to be afraid to keep flipping over rocks.
Yeah.
And that's it, right? Like, we do not have to be afraid of going outside the box because God is outside the box.
Yeah. That's right.
I love that.
I love that. Well, this has been fun.
Yeah, kind of all over the place, but I'm kind of about it.
Sometimes I like these episodes. Like I got a message from a friend just yesterday. Like he called me. He got a new phone number, and called me to kind
What
of.
is it?
555. Called me, and I had no idea. Listened to the podcast and was just really. So shout out to you. Like very, very encouraged by a lot of your story and feels very connected to your story. But sometimes I think like when we have more kind of theology out loud conversations, or it's more agile than it is pre-planned, even if it seems a little more haphazard or hops around, like I think there's a lot of goodness that happens in those conversations, because I think it maybe follows the mental flow of a lot of people listening.
And it follows the trajectory of deconstruction. It's very haphazard.
It is, but it's good.
This is like a microcosm of deconstruction. Should we name our podcast that?
The microcosm
of deconstruction. Very long title.
Yeah. I would just call it the microcosm.
Okay. That's cool. I'm going to end us. Is that cool?
Yeah, I think so.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. You don't have to fit God in a box, and embrace the journey.